John Dodson is with us. He's been with us before. He is the whistleblower on Fast and Furious. He's blown a lot of whistles. This one now, he's a former ATF agent, and he is far enough away from things to where he can legally say everything that he knows. I think everything he knows. But right now, the Mexican government is suing our gun makers. I believe this started, and the seeds were planted by the Obama administration on this one, but I could be wrong. But they're suing U.S. gun makers, and they're blaming us now. The tariffs are going up. Why? Why? Because unfair trade. Let's just have regular trade with each other. What you charge us, we'll charge you. But in the case of Mexico, it is also mainly about the border at this point. You have got to declare those drug cartels enemies of the state and terrorist organizations, and you've got to stop them. If not, we will. But you've got to stop what's happening on our border. What have they done? They're blaming us for the drug cartel violence. They're blaming our gun manufacturers for this. John is here to tell us the whole story, the author of The Unarmed Truth. Hello, John. How are you?
Hey, I'm fine, sir. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, yeah. I appreciate it. So tell me what's really going on.
Well, what's really going on is it's actually complicated, but the gist of it is the Mexican government is far and away responsible for arming the cartels. The data that I've seen and the way that E-Trace system works, so ATF has E-Trace, which is where firearms tracing is conducted. And if I can give you a brief background, if you don't mind.
No.
So the only way we can successfully trace, and when I say we, I mean ATF, and I'm retired now, but the only way you can successfully trace a firearm is if it has a U.S. nexus. It was either manufactured here or imported in the U.S. at some point. Either way, it's stamped manufactured in the U.S. or imported in the U.S. by the company that did so. So to say that all the crime guns successfully traced in Mexico are U.S. source firearms, it's kind of a rigged ballgame because the only ones we can successfully trace are U.S. source firearms anyway. If a firearm was made in, the former Soviet bloc or China,
we wouldn't have access to that. We're not tracking that.
Exactly. We can't trace that, so it doesn't come back. So the numbers are skewed from the very beginning. Now, put on top of that, of the U.S. source firearms, and this is where it comes into what's the motive behind it. Is it ignorance or is it deception? To say that the vast majority of crime guns recovered in Mexico are traced back to U.S. sources. Okay, again, we can only successfully trace those that are U.S. sourced anyway. But you are not discounting those ones that were purchased directly by the Mexican government. Now, I worked on the border for the past 12 years of my career, especially in firearms trafficking. In Fast and Furious, I was in a firearms trafficking unit. Like, that was all that we were supposed to do. And if you look at the data from E-Trace, it's clear. It's so clear. And by the numbers, the reports that I ran before I retired, every year, any 12-month period since 2010 until the day that I retired in 2023, whatever 12-month period you want to run, the Mexican government accounts for about 70 to 75% of the crime guns recovered in Mexico. And these are direct purchases by the Mexican government or government-to-government sales from the U.S. government to Mexico. The problem is those weapons are considered U.S. source, and ATF doesn't delineate, doesn't take those out of the numbers when they speak to Congress or when they release the information. They count them all as U.S. source firearms. And so the American civilian firearms market is left holding the bag and blamed for the cartel violence in Mexico.
Okay, so wait. So Mexico is buying this from us, and I assume that those guns are supposed to go to the Mexican government to fight cartels, etc. Are these guns going into the hands of the cartels?
Yes, 100%. And the icing on the cake is most of the money that they use to purchase these firearms is provided by the U.S. government. The Mexican government says, well, we need help fighting the cartels, so we give them money to purchase equipment and weapons. They buy these weapons directly from manufacturers, and I'll just say Colt, just as an example, all right, just because everyone recognizes the name Colt. They'll buy 2 Connex boxes of M4 variants, AR variants from Colt. These are military grade weapons. 2 Connex boxes come. One goes to the Mexican military. One's diverted into the black market. Those ones in the black market are recovered in crime scenes, subsequently traced, and then that's counted as a U.S. sourced firearm. When they release the data about all the crime guns in Mexico, they count that as a U.S. source firearm.
So, do we have the serial numbers to prove that they were purchased by the Mexican federal government?
100%. Like, it's all in E-Trace. If you look at the E-Trace data, one of 2 ways it will come back. And there are several different ways that this happens. So the Mexican government, ATF, has issued different entities of the Mexican government FFL numbers, and they all begin with a Z. It has a Z as the first character. So they can purchase directly from manufacturers, right? And so when one of those firearms is traced, the trace comes back and says this firearm was traced to a foreign government or law enforcement agency. Then the other way of doing it is they buy direct government-to-government sales. So the firearm trace comes back and says, quote, the firearm is a U.S. military weapon, unquote. So those are weapons purchased by the U.S. government and then sold to the Mexican government in order to support their efforts to fight the cartels, when in fact, the vast majority of the crime guns that are being recovered in Mexico are stemming from these direct purchases by the Mexican government.
So,
and I'm not joking. It's at least 70% every year that I ran it, and I ran it religiously to the day I turned my computer in and retired. I ran it, and it was 72% on that day, and it's always been 70 to 75%.
So we're talking to John Dodson. He is a former ATF agent. He was a whistleblower on Fast and Furious. He's the author of Unarmed Truth. And I think you were on the air and we talked about this. And we talked about how the ATF was targeting and harassing whistleblowers who were testifying in front of Congress. And I think you made a slight reference to this, but you couldn't talk about it or wouldn't talk about it. What's changed?
Well, if you remember, there was a different administration at the time. So
okay.
I was definitely worried about being prosecuted for providing this information.
All right. So who is, when they're doing this, is this because the Mexican government is the drug cartel? The Mexican government is afraid of the drug cartel? Who's really in charge of pushing the government to sue our gun manufacturers here?
Well, and those questions are what I refer to as echelons above Dodson. But I can tell you, okay, so best case scenario is the Mexican government doesn't know. Like the current president of Mexico and the former president and the one before that doesn't know. They only know the data that ATF has released that all these firearms are U.S. source firearms, and therefore they blame the U.S. civilian firearms market. That's best case scenario. Then you have to make the argument, or you have to at least ask the questions about, well, why don't they know the freaking truth? Like, if they're buying all these guns and they're not getting them all, they're being subverted into the black market, why aren't they aware of that? So,
well, you'd ask that of the Ukrainians too, but I digress.
Oh, exactly. That's a whole nother issue. I can only imagine where that trace information comes back to.
Oh my God.
But so the Mexicans are either they're willfully ignorant, all right, or it's entirely corrupt. Either way. But what frustrates me the most is, especially now during these current negotiations with the Mexican government over these tariffs and things like that, every time you hold them to account for something, the first response is, well, you got to stop the, quote, flow of firearms, unquote, south. You have to stop it. And it's so hard when we're negotiating, when our officials are negotiating with facts that aren't true, that aren't accurate, or at least are disguised in a way to where they don't have the true story. It's not fair to the American government. It's not fair to the American people, and it's not fair to the Mexican people at all.
So then why don't we do this? Because you can buy guns elsewhere in Mexico. Why don't we do this? Why doesn't, if Trump knows this, and I don't know if he does, but if Trump knows this, why doesn't he say, you know what, you're right, we're going to stop all guns from crossing the border. You can no longer buy American arms. I know that would hurt the arms companies here in America for maybe a year. But then things change and the truth is out. And Mexico doesn't want that. Why wouldn't he just say, okay, we'll stop all the guns coming across the border, buy your guns elsewhere for the next 12 months, and let's see what happens?
Well, I'm going to be honest, because I don't think they know. And that's part of the reason that I'm talking to you, is because there's no way to tell them. They'll call ATF, and ATF will say, oh, yeah, 80% of the firearms traced in Mexico are U.S. source firearms. But they don't take into account the direct purchases by the Mexican government or the government-to-government sales. Whoever's handling negotiations with Mexico, if they would sit down at the table and say, hey, we need you to work on fentanyl and border crossings and border security and things like this, and Mexico will do what they always do, which is say, well, you got to stop the flow of firearms. Say, okay, give me 1 second. I've just rescinded all of the export licenses for your government to purchase firearms directly. I've revoked the foreign FFLs that ATF has issued you, and I've ceased and desist all government-to-government sales from the Department of Defense and the State Department. There. Instantaneously, I have cut over 70% of the crime guns being supplied to Mexico. So now, Madam President, it's your turn. What are you going to do? Put up or shut up?
That's brilliant. Have you talked to anybody in the administration about this?
No, sir, I don't. How does anyone talk to the administration?
All right, do me a favor. Give me a white paper on this, and you tell me who it needs to go to, and I'll get it to them.
Okay.
Okay.
I have been pounding this drum, sir, for years. I've brought this to the attention of my ATF supervisors as far up the chain as I could go. I even physically handed the printouts, the documents, the data to the highest ranking DOJ official assigned to Mexico City at the time, and nothing ever happened of it. And again, this was a previous administration. So,
well, you don't expect anything from that, but I expect something from this. So give me the names of who it should go to, and give me the best, sharpest white paper on it. Don't overwhelm with facts. Give me the executive summary on the front so it can be understood and explained, and then give me all the facts after that. I'll have it delivered to the right people, and then I'll give them time to read it and digest it, or their people to digest it, and then I'll ask for an answer. What happened here? Why aren't you doing it?
No problems. I will work on that immediately this afternoon. But in the meantime, sir, and I want to tell you, I know there are a lot of ATF agents that listen to your show, and probably people in the administration. Don't have to take my word for it. You can call any ATF agent, like someone in the administration, call a field office. Don't call headquarters, call a field office. Call any ATF agent that has an E-Trace account and say, hey, I want you to run a report for me. Log on to E-Trace. On the right-hand side, it's generate a statistical report. Click on that. It's all going to automatically populate to your org code. Change that default to recovery location, put in Mexico, and do any 12-month time period that you want, and you will see the data is clear on this issue. All right? The Mexican military is the number one source of supplier of crime guns to the Mexican cartels, hands down. And I mean exponentially so. When you see the data, it's flabbergasting.
John, get me the data and get me that white paper on it and an executive summary, and I'll get it to them as soon as you give it to me. I will send it, turn it right around, and get it to all the leadership.
All right, sir. Will do. I appreciate it. Thanks,
John. I appreciate it. God bless. John Dodson, the unarmed truth. By the way, if you're an ATF agent and you can do that and you can verify what he's saying, call us. I'd love to hear from you. Because Mexico is putting in, they're suing us. They're suing all of our gun makers here in America for $10 billion. No, I don't think so. But it's going to the Supreme Court. I think the Supreme Court's going to say you don't have a leg to stand on. But again, it's the same kind of corrupt mentality of the last administration, of not actually addressing the issue, but going after little pet peeves and going after our guns and our rights to guns.